I'm Claire Anderson, 24 years old. And on that June morning, I stood at the center of the graduation hall of a prestigious East Coast law school, wearing a black gown stitched with gold thread, the mark of a valedictorian. My name echoed through the packed auditorium, spoken into the microphone, followed by applause and cheers from the rows of my classmates. But as I stepped onto the stage, holding the speech I had written 3 weeks prior, my eyes couldn't stop staring at 2 empty chairs in the very front row, the seats reserved for the family of the honored student. My parents weren't there. Neither was my sister. While my classmates turned and waved at their families, I stood alone, facing the cold absence in front of me. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times, my parents' tearful eyes, my mother covering her mouth in emotion, my father proudly squeezing my hand after the ceremony. Instead, I looked down and saw chairs no one sat in, flowers no one brought, and a soft crack in my chest that no one could hear but me. Inside the pocket of my gown, my phone kept buzzing quietly. I already knew why they weren't there, but like someone clinging to denial, I had held on to hope until the very last minute. Right before the ceremony, I opened Instagram. The latest post from my mother showed the whole family except me on the deck of a Caribbean cruise, cocktail in hand, sunlight shimmering on the turquoise sea. The caption read, "Healing time, so proud of Chloe's growth." I note. Chloe, my sister, had just broken up with her boyfriend, and my parents thought the best way to heal her spirit was to take a 7-day cruise around the islands, which happened to fall exactly on the same week as my graduation. They told me to understand that this is an important time for Chloe, she's really hurting. And me? Who was I in their lives? Just a shadow strong enough to walk through every major milestone without needing anyone to witness it. I took a deep breath, looked straight ahead into the hall, and began my speech in a voice eerily calm, as if I hadn't cried silently in the bathroom the night before. As if I hadn't waited until the last minute hoping they would show up. Then, like a knife slicing through the delicate silence I had fought to maintain, I spoke slowly, every word dropping like a stone sinking into deep water. If you needed a vacation more than your daughter's graduation, enjoy the view. Because you won't be seeing me again. The entire room went silent for a few seconds. Then the applause came louder, longer, but I didn't hear any of it. All I could see were the 2 empty chairs, and the diploma in my hand, proof of everything I had accomplished, yet the people I once loved most had chosen not to be there to witness it. I used to think injustice was loud, found in shouting matches, in angry punishments, in harsh scoldings. But I was wrong. Sometimes injustice is quiet, hidden in gentle smiles meant for someone else, in glances that are shared with everyone, except you. I had spent my childhood in what looked like a perfect family, a white 2-story house, a neatly trimmed lawn, Sunday church visits, and 4 plates always set at the dinner table. But deep down, even as a child, I always felt it. I was the extra piece in that family picture. I'm the eldest daughter. Claire, the child who learned to tie her own shoes at 4, who finished the entire school library's children's section by 1st grade. And who knew how to make mom smile with a handmade card instead of asking for expensive dolls. In the eyes of adults, I was easy, low maintenance, mature. And in a family with a younger sister who was often sick, sensitive, and cried easily, those traits of mine quickly became the excuse to leave me behind. Chloe, my sister, was the golden child of the family. As a kid, she would get a mild fever just from a change in weather, and that was enough for the whole family to cancel a picnic to take care of her. Chloe always sat next to our parents at every family gathering. As for me, I learned to pour my own water, wipe my own mouth, and clean up my own toys because Claire knows how, she doesn't need help. When I turned 8, my birthday gift was a book set about the solar system. Chloe, then 6, received a dollhouse twice her size, complete with glowing lights and background music. I wasn't jealous, at least that's what I told myself. I just looked at my gift and nodded, "Thank you, Mom and Dad." Mom patted my head gently and smiled. "My daughter loves knowledge more than toys, right?" That was the first time I heard the sentence that would follow me for the rest of my life. "You're strong, sweetheart. You don't need the same things Chloe does. That, all through school, I stayed at the top of my class. One year, I even won first place in the state debate competition. But when I came home with the medal, Mom only said, "That's good, but have you submitted your English essay yet? Don't slack off on the core subjects." Meanwhile, when Chloe was chosen as the lead dancer in the spring fair, the whole family took her out to celebrate, posted pictures on Facebook, and called it her first major achievement. I learned not to expect recognition. I learned to pat myself on the back whenever I got a perfect score. I learned to stay silent because every time I spoke up, it somehow became demanding, jealous, or lacking empathy. When I got the acceptance letter to college, a top law school with an acceptance rate under 10%, I came home still buzzing with joy. I remember it clearly. A Wednesday afternoon, I walked into the house holding the red envelope high. I got in, Mom and Dad. Partial scholarship. I'm going to law school. My mom was putting away groceries. She paused for a few seconds, then nodded and smiled. "That's great, honey, but how are you planning to cover the rest of the tuition?" I froze. "You mean, you're not going to help?" My mom glanced at Dad, like waiting for a cue. Then my father put down the newspaper and said calmly, "Claire, we've been saving up to send Chloe to study in Paris next year. That design program is really expensive." I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I just stood there, still holding the envelope, feeling my heart slowly ice over. They didn't ask how I felt. No one said, "We'll try to figure it out." No one hugged me and said, "We're proud of you." Only silence. And a look of quiet guilt as if I had disrupted a plan that was never meant to include me. From that day on, I started working part-time, serving at a coffee shop from 5 a.m. In the afternoons, I worked as a teaching assistant for tutoring classes. I applied for every scholarship I could find, even those that clearly stated they didn't accept late submissions. I found student housing far from campus and split the rent with 3 other students just to save every dollar I could. Meanwhile, Chloe was still being driven by Mom to her art classes, ballet sessions, and creativity camps. And still received daily encouragements like, "She's got talent. You have to invest in the right timing if you want her to succeed." I don't hate Chloe. She did nothing wrong. But I used to resent the way things worked in our family, how vulnerability was nurtured, while strength was simply treated as something that didn't need tending. I used to believe that if I achieved enough, they would finally look back. Be proud. Say, "Claire, you deserve love too." But the quiet years passed, and they gave me a different answer. Some people choose not to see even when the light is shining right in front of them. And then, on graduation day, when those 2 empty seats sat coldly in the place of honor, I realized it wasn't because they forgot. I thought I had grown used to being left behind, used to broken promises, used to parties I wasn't invited to, and milestones I reached that no one remembered. But I was wrong. Because no one ever truly gets used to being forgotten, especially not on the day you once believed would be the most beautiful moment of your life. That morning, I still called home. Even though I had a sinking feeling in my chest, even though I hadn't seen a single message from Mom all week, I still hoped maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe they'd show up at the last minute. I called Dad's phone. He picked up on the 4th ring, his voice light, as if nothing significant was happening. "Hello?" I hesitated, then asked, "Dad, today's my graduation. Where are you and Mom?" There was a short pause, like he was choosing his words. Then he said, so casually, "Claire, we're really sorry, but Chloe's been so exhausted these past few days, crying nonstop since the breakup. So we decided to take her on a little trip to help her feel better." I said nothing. My heart skipped a beat. "A trip? Where?" My father replied, still in that calm voice, "Caribbean. Just a gentle 7-day cruise. We thought she deserved it right now." They had always been a group of 3, tightly knit, and I was just the extra piece standing outside. I pressed my lips together, trying to keep my voice steady. "And what about me?" On the other end of the line, another pause. Then Dad said something I don't think I'll ever forget. "Claire, you understand, right? You're okay, you've always been the strong one." That word again. Strong. I hung up the phone, my hand gripping it as if it could somehow hold me together, stop the emptiness from howling inside. But I didn't cry. Not then. I simply stood up, straightened my graduation gown, stepped out of the waiting room, and walked toward the auditorium, where hundreds of students were glowing with joy, families by their sides. The ceremony began with traditional music and fanfare. My name was called among the students being honored. I walked down the aisle, each step feeling like it pressed against an old bruise in my chest. I took my seat, the one reserved for distinguished graduates, and pulled out my phone. Some part of me still clung to the hope that they might have sent at least a message. A word of encouragement. A simple wish. But no. There was nothing. Just a new post from my mother, uploaded less than 2 hours ago. I opened it. A photo of the three of them: Dad, Mom, Chloe sitting in a fancy restaurant on the ship's deck. Sunset stretching across the sea behind them, a wine glass in Mom's hand, Chloe beaming in a pastel pink silk dress I remembered from a summer fashion ad. The caption read, "Finally free, so proud of you, baby, healing time. Proud of you." It wasn't meant for me, not on my graduation day. It was for my little sister, who was off on a cruise to heal emotionally. I bit my lip hard. I don't remember how I pulled a tissue out of my robe pocket. I only remember that when the tears touched my chin, I realized I was crying, really crying for the first time in a long time. Not because they didn't come, but because I finally understood, no matter how hard I tried, I would never be the one they chose to be proud of. I wiped my tears, lifted my head. I couldn't let my friends see me like that. I couldn't let this pain become public. The ceremony went on. The person next to me was receiving their diploma. And when the host called out, "Claire Anderson, valedictorian of the law department, please come forward to deliver your speech," I stood, adjusted my gown. I don't remember everything I said that day. Maybe I thanked the professors. Maybe I spoke about resilience and persistence. But I remember one part clearly: the moment I looked straight at the two empty seats and spoke in a voice as calm as the ocean beyond the horizon. "If you needed a vacation more than your daughter's graduation, enjoy the view. Because you won't be seeing me again." The entire auditorium froze. Then came the applause. But I didn't rush off the stage. I walked toward the two empty chairs, the ones labeled Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, and gently placed my diploma on them. A diploma I had earned through sleepless nights, part-time jobs, and silent tears they never witnessed. I turned my back and walked out of the auditorium. No farewell, no glance back. There was nothing left to wait for, no one left to hope for. Because in that moment, for the first time in my life, I knew one thing for certain: I didn't need them to be present in order to be worthy. And I would never again let myself return to the role of someone endlessly waiting to be loved. I left the city on an unannounced Sunday morning. No goodbyes, no dramatic farewell post, no perfectly packed suitcase like some ad for a new chapter. Just an old car with barely enough gas, a few cardboard boxes filled with law books, a laptop with a broken hinge, and a tote bag carrying a plan I once scribbled in blurred ink and tears. I drove down the highway, leaving behind familiar streets, the frozen steps I once climbed after late-night shifts, and that house with the two chairs that were never meant for me. My destination was Seattle, a city I'd never been to, but I knew that there, no one knew my name. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. My first apartment in Seattle was a tiny studio on the third floor of an old building. The window faced west, and every afternoon the sunlight spilled across the peeling walls. Some nights, I slept to the sound of a dripping showerhead and EDM thumping from the apartment below. But it was my space. No one walked in without knocking. No one gave orders, no one compared me, no one told me to yield. I took a job at a small law office that specialized in labor rights, not high-paying, not prestigious, but enough to survive and to learn. I worked 6 days a week, from morning until night. In the beginning, I had no friends, no family to call, and no time to feel sad. There was only work, a demanding supervising attorney, and cases from workers forced into unpaid overtime, students tricked by exploitative contracts, immigrant women duped into signing power of attorney forms they didn't understand. I began to realize there were thousands of people out there just like me, people who had been underestimated, abandoned right when they needed help the most. And I realized something else. If I had no one to ask when I needed answers, then maybe I was meant to be the first one to start speaking. Late one night, under the dim yellow light of my desk lamp, I typed the first words of a draft. Clear rights. Know the law to protect yourself. No logo, no budget. Just a small YouTube channel, a free blog, and a few videos recorded on an old phone explaining how to read rental agreements, how to file insurance claims, how to break away from misleading contract clauses. At first, it got just a few views. But one day, a video titled 5 Things Every Street Student Should Know Before Signing an Internship Contract was shared on a college forum. Within 3 days, it had over 50,000 views. I never appeared on camera. No one knew my face, only my voice. And the knowledge I once had to learn in the dark was now becoming light for someone else. And so I kept going. No applause needed. No certificate on the wall. I used my earnings from legal consulting to sponsor tuition for 3 freshmen I met online. None of them knew who the donor was. I simply wrote one line in the email. Don't let a number stop you. I sent legal aid to a single mother being forced into an unfair lease. I helped a Black student file and win a case against an internship that discriminated against him. All anonymously. I didn't need them to know who I was. I just needed to know that there were other Claires out there, and I didn't want them to walk alone through everything I had once endured. One day, after completing a major legal advisory project for a social enterprise in California, I received my first 5-figure payment. I couldn't believe my eyes. I stared at the account balance, then looked out the window. Seattle was drenched in rain, and I knew it was time. I closed the laptop, grabbed my keys, stepped onto the street, and walked straight to the showroom. Not to prove anything to anyone. Simply because I had once waited for the bus in the middle of a snowstorm, had once walked 4 kilometers every day just to save gas money. And now, I wanted my first car to be something I chose, paid for, and held on to, entirely by myself. The silver-gray Tesla Model 1, Model 3 parked in the building's lot wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder of the journey. I placed my hands on the wheel for the first time, and instead of thinking, I've won, I thought, I made it here without needing anyone to lead the way. That night, I cleaned up my workspace. On the desk was a faded photo me, in a graduation gown, standing alone on stage. No parents. No bouquet. No hands raised from the audience. I picked up the photo and placed it next to the notebook I used for clear rights. I wrote one more line. They may never have seen me, but I see so many others now, and this time, I won't look away. Maybe I haven't forgiven them yet. Maybe I'm still healing. But for the first time in my life, I don't feel the need for their approval to believe in my worth. I don't need their applause. I don't need their pride. Because my presence is enough. I am Claire Anderson. And this isn't the end. This is the beginning of a story I will write on my own terms, step by step, word by word, for every person I can help, even if it's in silence. 1 month after graduation, when the applause had faded into memory and my honorary diploma still sat on my desk not yet framed, I heard a knock at the door. 3 soft, hesitant taps. Not the kind from a mailman or a neighbor borrowing a path, but a rhythm so familiar it made my skin crawl. I stood up from my chair, a cup of cold tea still in hand, and opened the door. My father was standing there. He looked the same as always, shirt buttoned up, left hand in his pocket, right hand holding a navy blue folder. But unlike always, his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He looked like someone who had lost his way, yet was trying hard to pretend he hadn't. I stepped aside without saying a word, letting him into my small studio apartment in Seattle, far from everything he'd ever called familiar. He didn't sit right away. He stood still for a while, eyes scanning the room, as if searching for something to hold on to, maybe a trace of softness. Then he placed the folder on the table. I recognized it instantly. It was the diploma I had left behind on those 2 empty chairs that day. I didn't feel moved. I didn't feel angry. My heart felt like a brick wall, too used to being knocked on. I pulled out a chair for him and sat down across as if this were a formal meeting, not the first time a father and daughter had seen each other after 14 days of cold silence. "I brought your diploma," he said, his voice low and slightly hoarse. I nodded gently. "I know." A pause stretched between us. Then he started talking about the return, how they came back after the cruise, how they saw my speech being shared online, how some relatives had forwarded the recording to my mother, how they were very surprised. I didn't respond. Surprise is an emotion reserved for people who care. As for me, I had stopped being surprised a long time ago. I thought, somewhere in that monologue, there might be an apology. A quiet, "I was wrong." A hint of remorse, even if late. But the story suddenly shifted direction. "Claire." His voice softened. "Chloe's been doing a little better lately. She's thinking of opening a small fashion boutique in Los Angeles, really creative, a lot of potential. It's just that." He hesitated, eyes flicking briefly to the Tesla key I had left on the table. "She's short on some capital. And your mom and I already helped her quite a bit with her last internship. So this time, do you think you might be able to help her? Maybe sell the car, just temporarily?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, looking straight at the man across from me. The man who once taught me to ride a bike. Who used to carry me to bed after church. Who chose not to attend my graduation to take a cruise with another daughter. Who now sat in front of me, not to apologize, but to continue the same story he had been telling all his life. Chloe needs, Claire gives. I rested my arms on the table, eyes locked on the gaze he kept avoiding. "So, you didn't come for me." My voice held no sadness, no accusation, just clarity. "You came for her, like always." He was silent. And I had grown far too familiar with that silence. "You know," I said, gesturing toward the diploma on the table. "To get that, I had to work more than 60 hours a week. I lived on instant noodles, slept under a leaky ceiling, applied for scholarships 7 times before one was approved. But neither of you ever asked if I was tired. You never asked if I needed anything. And on that day, when the whole auditorium stood, when they called my name as valedictorian, those 2 chairs were still empty. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city still buzzing below. That car," I continued, "was the first thing I ever bought for myself without asking anyone, without needing anyone's permission. It's not just a vehicle, it's proof that I could do it. Not to outshine anyone. Just to walk on my own." I turned to face him. "So, no. I'm not selling it, and if Chloe needs funding, then this time, you should choose her fully. Don't come looking for the daughter you once left behind, hoping she'll compensate for the choices you made." My father said nothing. He just sat there, face clouded with confusion he couldn't hide. He stood, picked up the diploma from the table, as if to hand it back to me. But I gently shook my head. "Keep it, to remember." Then I opened the door quietly, like closing a door that had stayed open too long for things that never truly belonged. As he stepped over the threshold, I didn't look back. I only whispered, just loud enough for myself to hear. "This time, I won't be the one paying the price." It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, right after I'd wrapped up a session with the community legal team. Only a few staff members were still typing out the final lines of their reports before clocking out. I had just poured myself a cup of chamomile tea when I heard the knock, sharp, rushed, urgent. Before I could even reach the door, it burst open. Chloe. My sister, the one who didn't show up at my graduation, who went on a cruise with the whole family while I stood on stage alone. The one I had spent my entire childhood giving up seats for, giving up glances for, giving up applause for. Today, she stood before me, hair disheveled, mascara smudged, a luxury coat thrown on hastily, eyes swollen like she'd been crying the entire way here. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Not the radiant Chloe from Instagram, not the one Mom always called the light of the family. The girl in front of me was different, lost, trembling, and desperate enough to turn to the sister she'd once ignored. "Claire," she said, her voice nearly breaking. "You have to help me." I set my cup down and motioned for her to sit, not rushing. Chloe stepped in and sat across from me, wringing her hands tightly. "My store, it failed. The investors pulled out. I'm drowning in product debt, rent debt, even personal debt. I don't know what to do anymore." She wiped her tears and pulled out an invoice from her bag. "You're a lawyer, you understand if I don't pay this by next week, I'll be sued." I sat in silence for a moment, letting her speak. Then I asked, "Why did you come to me?" Chloe didn't lift her head. "Because you're the only one who can help me now. Mom and Dad said they can't help anymore. I just thought you wouldn't turn your back on family." I sat upright, eyes fixed on hers. "Do you think I owe you something?" Chloe waved her hands quickly. "No, that's not it. I know you're successful, you have money, you've made it, it's just, this time, I really need it." I took a deep breath. My voice stayed calm, not angry, not sharp, just clear. "I'm sorry, Chloe, but I can't help you." In that instant, the fear in Chloe's eyes turned into fury. She jumped to her feet, face flushed red. "Who do you think you are? Some saint? Some big shot?" She stormed over to my desk, pointing a finger at me. "I know your old firm got sued. I know you almost lost your job over a contract error. I still have the article. Do you want me to leak it to the press? You think I won't?" I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I didn't tremble. I simply opened my laptop, typed a few lines. A folder appeared. I turned the screen toward Chloe. "Good," I said, my voice as calm as it had been at the start of the meeting. "Then read." On the screen was a list of PDF files. Each one titled clearly, with dates, attached evidence. I pointed to them, one by one. "This is the loan contract you forged with a fake signature under the company's name. This is the credit card bill you used under Mom's name, the account I've been paying off for the past year. This is the audio recording where you told your ex-boyfriend that borrowing money and never paying it back is normal. And this is the internal security footage showing you taking design samples from another studio and registering them under your own name." Chloe stepped back, eyes wide, mouth open but unable to speak. I looked at her not with satisfaction, not with anger, just the gaze of someone exhausted from pretending not to see. "I'm not perfect, Chloe. I've made mistakes. But I corrected them. I got up on my own. You've always had someone there to clean up after you. Until there was no one left. And this time I won't be the one continuing that mistake." The room fell silent. Chloe turned away, wiped her tears, then looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw something break in her eyes. Not because of the money, but because of the truth that her sister, the quiet shadow in the family, was now the one who could uncover everything she had tried to bury. She said nothing more. Quietly, she walked out, leaving behind a lingering stillness in the office. I closed the laptop, wondering. If I were someone else, someone softer, someone still yearning for acceptance, would I have reached out again? But I knew that if I did, I would be betraying the journey that had brought me here. I don't hate Chloe. But I can no longer carry the role that someone else always forced me into, the one who always forgives, always rescues, always sacrifices for a family that never truly chose her. This time, I chose differently. I chose to hold my boundary. I chose to protect my worth. Even if that meant watching my sister fall and no longer reaching out to catch her. After that encounter, I sat alone in the office, staring at the carefully organized files inside a folder labeled with a single name. No longer silent. It was everything I had quietly gathered over the past 2 years, not to harm my sister, but because I knew one day, the truth would need to be laid bare. Not for revenge. Just so things could finally be put in their rightful place. I hesitated. For a long time. Because Chloe was still my sister. The girl who used to sleep beside me in our pink childhood room, who once slipped a torn teddy bear into my hand when I cried after being bullied. But I also couldn't forget her eyes that day when she held a threat like a blade, just to force me to bow down once again. And I understood. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't just be betraying myself, I would be complicit in the very things I should have spoken out against long ago. That night, I opened my laptop, sent an email of just a few lines to my parents, attaching the folder with a short note. I don't need an apology. I'm not asking for a conversation, but I think it's time you saw everything you once chose not to see. I didn't wait for a reply. I had no expectations. I shut down my laptop, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window, looking out at a city still bathed in nightlight. Inside, I didn't feel lighter, but I no longer carried the same weight. Just a quiet stillness, like placing a stone into a river that's been rushing for far too long. A week passed. No messages, no calls, no explanations. I carried on with my work, attending legal advisory sessions, writing new articles for ClearRights, just like always. Then, on a Friday afternoon, a colleague of mine, someone I'd once worked with in the investment law field, sent me a link. "Claire, this is your sister, right?" I clicked it open. A short article, published in a financial magazine, reporting that a fashion project in Los Angeles had suddenly lost investor funding due to internal concerns regarding transparency in management. The final line made me stop. The original investors, the Anderson family, have confirmed they are withdrawing financial support and will no longer fund any personal ventures under their youngest daughter's name. I didn't have to ask. Didn't need to confirm. I knew my parents had received the email. They had read every word. They had checked everything I sent. And for the first time, they couldn't deny it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel the thrill people often associate with revenge. I just felt something quietly fall into place inside me, like a book closing after the final chapter, with nothing left to add. That night, I opened the old notebook I'd been using to jot down ideas for ClearRights. On the first page, I added a single line. I didn't seek revenge. I just chose not to stay silent. That was my answer. To my parents, to Chloe, and to myself, the girl who once stood frozen in the middle of the graduation hall, staring at two empty seats, wondering why she wasn't worth witnessing. I don't know what my parents thought when they decided to walk away. I don't know what passed between them and Chloe, but I know this time, they didn't turn to me to intervene. They didn't expect me to step in and save the day like before. They stayed silent, maybe because they understood, or, at the very least, acknowledged the truth they had once chosen to ignore. I closed the notebook, set it beside my laptop, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I no longer carried the role of the daughter who's strong, so she doesn't need anything. I didn't need to win because I had never been competing. I only wanted the right to exist, without constantly having to prove myself. And now, I was doing that day by day, step by step, in every quiet act, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the path I had chosen to walk. One crisp autumn morning, I received an email with a simple subject line. Invitation from the National Young Lawyers Conference. I was about to dismiss it like I had with so many invitations before until I read the final sentence. We believe your story deserves to be heard not because it's perfect, but because it's real. I sat still in front of the screen for a long moment. Not out of surprise, but because for the first time the invitation didn't require a resume, didn't come with conditions, didn't ask me to prove anything more. It simply asked me to show up. The conference that day was held in a small but warm auditorium in downtown Seattle, a gathering of young lawyers from across the country, sharing stories, knowledge, and the trials that once kept them awake through the night. I had been invited as a special guest, the founder of ClearRights, a project once dismissed as too small to matter, now quietly becoming the largest open platform network for free legal aid dedicated to students and young workers. This year's theme: Justice doesn't need applause. I sat in the front row, holding a speech scribbled hastily on recycled paper the way I always did. Nothing flashy, no theatrics, just honest thoughts from the life I had lived. When the host called my name, I walked up to the stage with steady steps, no longer trembling, no longer afraid of being overlooked, no longer feeling like I was stepping into a place I didn't belong. I was Claire Anderson. I belonged here. No proof required. No permission needed. I began my speech with a question. How many times in your life have you witnessed injustice but chose to stay silent because you believed if you were strong enough, you'd get through it alone? The room fell still. No one answered aloud, but I knew everyone was remembering something. I spoke about my journey. From a child who was never chosen, to a student who paid her own tuition, to a young lawyer once threatened with her own past. I talked about clear rights. About the anonymous messages saying, "Thank you, it's the first time I've understood my rights." I talked about how I once thought I needed recognition until I realized what I truly needed was not to be erased. Not once did I mention my family's name. Not once did I allude to them. But when I ended my speech with the words, "Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to be seen by the right person, at the right moment, even if only once," I felt it two familiar eyes, watching me from the very last row of the auditorium. I saw them, my parents sitting quietly, not in the front, not holding flowers or cameras. My mother wore an old gray coat, my father looked thinner than the last time I saw him. They didn't speak during the event, they didn't come forward afterward. They just sat there, in silence, as if they, too, were hearing something for the first time in their lives. When the conference ended, I stepped into the lobby. Not many people lingered to chat, most rushed off to catch flights. I was reaching down to grab my coat when I heard footsteps stop behind me. I turned around. It was them. My mother stepped forward first, lightly clutching her sleeve as if trying to hide her unease. "Claire, we heard everything. We're sorry." "How?" I didn't look away. I didn't recoil. I simply smiled, a quiet smile, not bitter, not sharp, just the kind that comes from exhaustion cooling into calm. I said, gently but clearly, "I don't need an apology. If an apology could fill every empty space, maybe I wouldn't have sat alone through my graduation ceremony." My mother lowered her gaze. My father stood behind her, silent, hands in his pockets, eyes drifting somewhere far off. I continued, "I'm not angry, I'm just sad." Because what I needed wasn't regret in the past tense. What I needed was presence at the right time. I looked at them one last time, not to search for softness or remorse, but simply to confirm within myself that I had said everything I needed to say. And then, I turned and walked away. No tears, no drama. Just a quiet step out of the role I had forced myself to play for far too long. For the first time, I was the one walking away, and they didn't follow. They didn't call after me. They didn't reach for me with another excuse. They stood there, in silence, in a lobby slowly emptying, like strangers who had once known each other deeply, but now no longer remembered how to step into each other's world. And I kept walking toward a life I had built with my own hands and the scars to prove it. A life where I no longer needed applause, but no one had the right to turn their back on me anymore. I write this not to tell a sad story, but to say this to you, the one reading all the way to this final line: you are not alone. If you've ever been left behind by your family at your most important milestones, if you've ever heard the words, "It's not that we don't love you, it's just that your sibling needs more." If you've ever had to keep walking, swallowing your tears, quietly closing the door after a cold dinner, then you are not alone. Comment. I chose myself and I don't regret it. If you've ever stood at that crossroads and chosen you, instead of chasing people who never truly looked back. I'm not writing these words from a grand estate. I still live in a small apartment, still work every day like millions of others. But I'm writing this from a place I never thought I'd reach. Peace. And I want you to know you can get there too. You don't need to be chosen, you don't need the applause. You don't need anyone to stand for you. Because light, true light, doesn't need permission to shine. And I Claire Anderson, the girl who once stood alone before two empty chairs, understood that the day I stopped waiting for someone to step forward and stepped out of the shadow of silence I had lived in for far too many years. Because in the end, I don't need them to see me to shine.